India accounts for only 16% of the world's population, but 60% of the world's population that defecates in the open lives in India. If we are going to deal with the nutrition problem, the only way to address it is if we get our sanitation right. I didn't see enough of that, I must say, in the 12th five-year plan, what I've just said. I'm sorry, I'm going on, but I will try and be briefer now. RTE. Yes. Yes, of course, enrollments have risen, quality is declining. But there are 2 or 3 things which I think I want to emphasize at this point. It's true that the middle class is leaving the government school, so a school for poor children are poor schools. You know, we know all these things. But we've got a real conundrum here. And we've had this conundrum for decades, and no plan, no matter how nice, and no matter how much money you put into the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, is going to solve the problem that I'm about to raise. In 2004, the World Bank did a nationally representative sample survey of teacher absenteeism. And they had done it in 7 other countries, low-income countries, and we came down, we were 7th in the league table. 25% of our teachers were absent. And those who were present they were not necessarily found to be teaching. Now, if that's the state, why would a child even come to school, let alone remain there? Parents are still pulling children out of school because they are not learning anything. And by the way, Karthik Muralidharan and the World Bank apparently have done a recent survey. I think it was done in 2011, and I've been pestering Karthik every day. Send me the results. But he's told me the results are still the same. So how is this problem going to be solved? If the teachers are not going there, and even if they, and I'm not even going to the issue of subject knowledge, that's another issue. I won't even go there. First, let's just ensure that what they know, if they're there, then they will teach. If they teach, then the children will come. Because the poor are so desperate for their children to get educated. So let's not blame the parents any longer. It's the states. It's the state government which is refusing to solve the problem. Because the central government can't do anything about it. Education is a state subject, and the state governments have to take on the teacher unions. No question about it. They have no choice in the matter, but not willing to take them on. Of course, we also have to provide for housing for the teachers there, just as you have to provide for housing in the subcenter and the PHC, otherwise the doctors will not stay. You have to, how do you expect women teachers in particular, for instance? And if you want girls to remain in school, they need a role model, they need girl teachers, and especially at the upper primary level, because we might have universalized enrollment at the primary level, we haven't even universalized enrollment at the upper primary level. And one of the most serious problems there is girls, although they are remaining there, which I will come back, them remaining in school, and Sonal was right in that regard. But so, if you don't break the back of the teacher unions, there's not a hope in hell that this is reviving. Let me turn to this very important and dramatic change and good news that Sonal rightly pointed our attention to, which is that girls between the ages of 6 and 14 are not in child labor, but in school, and girls over 14 are also continuing in school. Dramatic change in numbers between just 2005 and 2010. The NSS data is just so revealing. Dramatic. Now, it shows how poor parents are just desperate, even for their girls to acquire education. Desperate. But these girls, once they complete 7, 8 years of education, they're not going to continue to do the Zari Zardoshi, the agarbatti making, the bidi making, like their mothers used to do. Not going to do that. They're going to move out. They'll want to move out. you will see a phenomenon of these girls wanting to move to urban areas. You will see a replication of Jakarta, of Manila, of Bangkok happening, that you go to any retail mall and they are full of these youngsters who've just completed 8 years of education and they've moved out. And the question is, will their parents allow them to do that if our cities become as unsafe as they are now? Big question. So skills is a very important issue, no question about it. Skills for girls, very important, and let me address that issue in a minute, but I will address that issue only after I address jobs. Well, we were the ones who wrote the chapter on employment. In the 12th plan, we were the ones who wrote the chapter on skill development. And Caitlin was absolutely right. There was a remarkable growth in employment outside of agriculture between 2000 and 2005, but the NSS data between 2005 2010 shows exactly the phrase that Caitlin used, which comes straight out of our paper, joblessness and informalization, challenges to inclusive growth. Because what happened was that as compared to the first half of the decade when 60 million jobs were created, although 20 million of those are not worth talking about because 20 million of those are in agriculture and they are distress driven, 40 million jobs in non-agriculture were created. I don't have the time to go into that. Wait for our next paper on that subject, why employment did not rise in 2005, 2010. But there's a real issue out there that in the second half of the decade, manufacturing employment actually fell in absolute terms. Fell in absolute terms. And it had increased by about 25% in the first half of the decade. It actually fell by 10% in the second half of the decade. In services, it had increased by 20% in the first half of the decade. It increased by only 4% in the second. But something very interesting is happening. People are leaving agriculture. Rural distress has caused people leaving agriculture. 14 million people left agriculture by the subsidiary and principal status between 2005 and 2000. First time in the history of our country that we've seen a decline, absolute decline in the numbers in agriculture. So if they didn't go to manufacturing, didn't go to services, where did they go? Construction. Massive increase in employment in construction thanks to the investments in infrastructure, in housing, etc. And this is true across the board, across the whole country, rural as well as urban. I mean, I'm amazed that in my home state of UP, in the last 5 years, I've seen such a dramatic change that you've got not a single house, almost not a single house in a village is a kacha house. Every house is a pakka house. So in other words, and brick kilns are all over the place. They're mushrooming all over the place. Construction employment is growing. So there is that transition, which you expect as an economy transforms itself from, is beginning to happen. That's very good news. But one of the reasons why the capital intensity of output has been increasing in manufacturing particularly, but also to some extent in services, is the skill gaps and the skill shortages at the top. So while 500 million to be skilled is a completely unfounded number, by the way, based on no definition whatsoever, and we've questioned that. And if you've read our piece in the March 30th issue of 2013 of the EPW, you will see how we've questioned it, systematically undermined that number, because it has no foundation. However, we have estimated an alternative number, and it is still extremely challenging. We come up with a number over the next 10 years, meaning 2012 to 2022, of 290 million, of which, and it's very important to emphasize this, 100 million are people who must complete 10 years of general academic education. So only the remaining 190 consist of those who need either technical education post higher secondary or vocational training in the secondary or the higher secondary level, and those who are already in the workforce, who have less than 10 years of education. Because what we project, our projections are based on the assumption that of the current share of 45% of total non-agricultural workforce which has 10 years of education, that will go up to 90% of total non-agricultural workforce will have 10 years of education. So by those definitions, founded of course on NSS numbers, we estimate 100 million people additional need general academic, and then the remaining 190 are vocational technical, including those who are in the workforce. So a huge challenge, no question about it. And I'm sorry to say, you look at the 11th plan, not very good news. If you're interested, I can tell you, or read the chapter. Finally, let me close by talking about this issue of the food bill. The food security bill, because that's related to some of the nutrition, the health issues that I've been talking about, is the following. I agree with Sonal that there are real issues about identifying the poor. However, all the criticisms that Sonal was making about the identification of the poor, please remember, just for clarity's sake, when the Planning Commission puts out a number, 25% or 30% of the country's population is below the poverty line, that's a Tendulkar-based estimate of the poor. It doesn't tell you whether Rajat Kathuria is poor or not and Santosh Mehrotra is poor or not. That's a different exercise. A totally different exercise takes place. And that's run by the MORD, the Ministry of Rural Development, and it has been run 3 times, 92, 97, 2002. And it was done in 2002. And the most recent one is still ongoing. It is about to finish. It will hopefully put this whole matter to rest. The criticisms are very legitimate, very correct, but are based upon the design that was used for the MORD survey of 2002, and which was a terrible, terrible design. Everyone is agreed about that in the Planning Commission. And the Saxena Committee report, the NC Saxena Committee report, actually has attempted to change that. I was a member of that. In fact, the base paper that I did in EPW in 2008 became the basis then, as I'm not saying this, NC says this, that of the NC Saxena Committee report, which has now been the basis for the SECC, run by meaning the Socioeconomic and Caste Census, which has been happening for the last 2 years throughout the country, and hopefully that issue will go away. So, and on this issue that Sonal raised, if you're going to do this only every 5 years, then are you only thinking of this as chronic poverty? What about transient poverty? That issue we've taken care of, the economists. So we, obviously took care of that. We said every 2 years, there has to be an assessment by the Gram Sabha about the identified poor. So whether people are moving in, moving out, that's going to be taken care of. So it's not, in this new one, it's not going to be self-reported or any such thing based on those 13 questions. So as far as the food bill is concerned, the problem is not really targeting. I think the objective is to have as universal a program. The real problem is the following, that if you put the food bill in place without first reforming the PDS, it will be a nightmare and a disaster. There is no question about it. And there is some recognition within government about this, but we just hope that PDS reform happens preferably before, but certainly simultaneously with the passage of the food bill. Because if that does not happen, this will be a nightmare of the PDS, of the current TPDS, multiplied many-fold. And I agree entirely with Sonal that food inclusion, what foods should you include? Millet is already in the bill. Tamil Nadu has been doing many of these things. So anyway, let me stop there. Thank you. And let me open it up. Let me open it up for discussion. And the floor is open, ladies and gentlemen. Please identify yourself and, unlike me, be brief. Sir, identify yourself.
I am Professor Anil Srivastava, Editor-in-Chief of International News Bureau. Thank you for your thought-provoking and very informative speech. I want to know what could be the roadmap for the sanitation, education, and health in rural area. Thank you.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll take sort of 3 questions, and then we will open it up to my colleagues here. Yes, ma'am. And you after that, sir.
Thank you, sir. I am Shipra Maitra from Amity University. I have two questions to the panelists. One is related to the decline in women participation ratio. Now, women participation ratio, we have seen that in Delhi, as it is increasing in per capita income, the participation ratio is very poor compared to Bihar. So, whether this should be taken as an indicator or we should discuss about the voluntary and involuntary unemployment issues related to the women, because many of the women, even if they are in the affluent sector, they are not interested in taking up in job. So, that is one issue which should be taken care of when we are talking about the women participation, low participation as an indicator for development. Similarly, with that women in politics. There are very interesting studies which says, like in panchayats, where most of the states have done 50% reservation because the panchayat elections are fought on the non-political issues mainly. I mean, non-political party. Direct political parties are not involved. But when it goes to assembly and parliament, many of the women actually are not interested in coming into the politics in that way. So when we are taking this as an indicator, we should think that whether these aspects have been taken care of. And second question, ma'am, is again related to the quality of education. Now, obviously, till class 5, the primary education, if we look at the quality, yes, this is very, very pathetic. But whether we should focus on that, or we should focus on the very primary thing that at least the women or the who has gone up to class 5, maybe they are not qualified to read a class 5 textbook, but at least they can sign and they can count the money received on the money order, or they can count the money they have received for the Narega scheme. So whether in this stage, even if the quality is not that much, whether we should concentrate on, even then we should concentrate on expanding the primary education level, which is giving them at least some tool to improve themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, at the back.
Thank you. Dr. Mehrotra, I would like to take up your point on the unmet needs that you mentioned for people from the social sector. I'd like to draw the attention of the distinguished panelists that the unmet needs or unrecognized needs of people with disability. So people belonging to the social sector where the needs are unmet, but for people with disability, the needs are not even recognized. Take any of the needs that we talked about: literacy, basic education, health, sanitation, food, shelter, skill development, employment, you name it. There's not a mention anywhere in today's discourse or the discourses in any other discourse that is available. So my question is, how do we look into the challenge and opportunities for people with disability? Because in the social sector, what I see is that they're the lowest in the hierarchy, that we don't even focus on the recognition or that people do exist. And there are roughly probably about 70 million people with disability in India. And I feel they are further marginalized from the marginalized sectors, because you take a person with disability, that could be a girl child, a child from a rural area, a person from a poorer background, a person belonging to the Dalit category or to the Muslim category, because disability is a cross-cutting issue even amongst the groups that we are talking today. And what is it that we need to do to say that the 70 million population of our country are not further marginalized from the marginalized groups? And how do we end this hierarchy in the social sector?
Sir, then we'll go there. There are many, many hands which are coming up. I think after two more questions, I'm going to give a chance to
I shall be very brief. My name is S.C. Kapoor. I'm from the Association of Synthetic Fiber Industry. You made a comment, and I'll make a comment on that, that in the manufacturing sector, the growth of jobs is not taking place. Well, you cannot really make a remark like this in the manufacturing sector without addressing the need to reform the labor laws. The inflexible labor laws are probably a main factor for the employment not growing in the
Can I ask you a
manufacturing.
very specific question about that? What exactly are you referring to? Are you referring to Industrial Disputes Act, Chapter 5?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So tell,
That's-
as an employer, tell me your experience.
so
that's much better
that's it.
rather than,
Yeah.
people talk about labor law as though all labor laws are a problem.
That's it, okay. Then the power availability, the quality of power. So all these factors need to be addressed. And you talked about the poverty, number of people below the poverty line. Even Dr. Arjun Sen Gupta report, I think it mentioned about 310 million people below poverty line. But what is the definition of poverty line? What the Planning Commission has been saying, 30 rupees? Or it is less than $2 a day?
It's not $2 a day. It is the Planning Commission number of 30 rupees per person per day. Can we just remember that? Per person per day.
Well, if that is the concept of the poverty line, I think it needs to be raised in today's context. Even a caddy in a golf club earns much more, and still he says he's below poverty line.
Sir, I must respond to that actually, because somehow there's genuine misunderstanding